Sounds great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Courtney Nichols, and I'm one of the co-leaders of Plunkett Cooney's Labor and Employment Practice Group. It's my pleasure to serve as coordinator for today's webinar, and I will be doing double duty as a member of the panel as well. Our goal for today's program is to provide you with some late breaking news regarding Michigan's Vacc to Work guidance and what employers need to do to ensure they have a compliant workplace. We are hoping today to prepare you for what's to come in the next few weeks, and with May 24 right around the corner, I know a date that many have had in their calendar for a couple of weeks now. We want you to be prepared and ready to go. We intend today to cover some of the high points, many of the things that most of you today have probably already seen, and leave a good chunk of time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. We've also started to receive some questions by way of email that we will try to address at the end of the presentation. So please note that if you have a question, you don't have to necessarily wait. You can type it into the chat box on our Zoom feature, and I will be monitoring those questions so we can circle back and try to get you answers at the end of the presentation. Likewise, if you have any one of our email addresses, you can email us at any time, and we'll try to address your questions. Today, I am joined by two of my colleagues, Laura Dinan of our Petoskey office and Stacy Kelly, who works here in Bloomfield Hills. Before we get started, I want to take a few minutes just to provide you with some background regarding each of us and our firm, Plunkett Cooney. Plunkett Cooney is a firm based here in Southeast Michigan and is one of the Midwest's oldest and largest law firms with approximately 150 attorneys. As we say here today, we have 7 offices throughout Michigan. We also have an office in Chicago, Indianapolis, and Columbus. Our employment law practice group includes 20 attorneys who work in the areas of traditional labor law, human resources consulting, employment litigation, workers' comp, anything related to employment law. Laura Dinan is a practitioner with over 30 years of experience advising employers. As I mentioned, she works in Petoskey and has built a successful practice representing public and private sector employers of all sizes throughout Northern Michigan. Her expertise includes traditional labor and all types of employment law matters. She's a past president and currently the secretary of the board of directors for the Northern Michigan Society of Human Resource Directors. Stacy Kelly is an associate attorney who focuses her practice in the area of employment law. Her clients include businesses and nonprofits, and she has particular expertise working with institutions of higher education. Prior to attending law school, Stacy worked for 12 years at universities with athletic conference offices. I've been working in the area of employment law for over a decade now. I exclusively defend employers in litigation and provide human resources consulting and advice to my clients on all aspects of employment law, what I like to say from A to Z, from hiring to firing, and then unfortunately, often in litigation. With a few housekeeping notes to complete, we will then get started. As I mentioned, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so please don't hesitate to get familiar with that chat feature and type in any questions you might have. I want to mention that today's session is being recorded and that the recording will be available on the event page of Plunkett Cooney's website, which is located at plunkettcooney.com. So you can get a link when this is done and then share with colleagues or keep it for your use moving forward. So with that said, I'm going to get started with the substance of our presentation today. So as you know, the title of our program today is Getting Back to Work, which is a play on the governor's plan to increase vaccination throughout the state of Michigan. So we, as this presentation was starting, we're getting a ton of questions throughout a prep session about getting back to work, about bringing people back, about remote workplace, about what it means. And then, as many of you know, we had another wrench got thrown at us by way of dramatically changing mask mandate. So we are going to address both of those today. But first, the question that we've been getting is, how do we get people back here and what should we do? Should we bring everybody back? Should we bring nobody back? What's going to happen? What guidelines do we have? What rules apply? So my advice is always the very first thing we need to do when we're trying to figure out what are we going to do to our workplace and how are we going to make changes is assess business needs. So I think it is a bad practice to have a blanket policy when we're dealing with employment law. A blanket, one size fits all, inflexible policies typically cause us problems, both from an employee morale standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, and oftentimes from a legal standpoint. So what can we do to make sure that we are addressing our particular business needs and not just doing what we did 10 years ago or what sounds like the quote unquote right thing to do? So when we're assessing business needs, the first thing that pops in my mind is, are we effective? Are we productive? Are our employees working from home? We are going through that process here at Plunkett Cooney. What's happening here? If we were to open up our doors and bring back 150 employees, are we going to be able to social distance? Are we going to be able to make sure that we're complying with the current guidance from the CDC regarding mitigating the risk of COVID-19 and the emergency rules from MIOSHA that are still in effect? Do we have a need to bring back more employees? Are we a business that has laid off some employees because business was lower and now we're starting to ramp back up? So are we going to actually increase our workforce? Do we have furloughed employees? And are we at the position now where we can make a decision regarding how we move forward or not with the furloughed employees? Another consideration is job restructuring. So this might be a great opportunity for companies that have been trying to become more efficient or trying to put the right person in the right seat to look at job restructuring and to get the organizational chart exactly where it needs to be before you go to question number 2, which is what do we do when we get all these people back here? So as you're going through and you're assessing these business needs, the next thing that we're looking at is are there personal issues at play here? Okay, so first, what's working for the business? What's not working for our business? Where are we positioned within the marketplace? Where are we positioned in terms of our productivity metrics? Where are we positioned in terms of how many employees we need here and how many employees we don't? Those type of questions. And then the next thing is, I think it's really important to look at it at a personal level, okay? Because some workplaces are going to be dramatically different than others. And some workplaces are going to have a much higher percentage of their employees that really benefit from working at home and are going to have serious problems theoretically and practically coming back to the workplace. So one of the things that we look at is childcare needs or issues. And I'm sure that many of you went through this when COVID started back in March of 2020, and all of a sudden there was a massive increase in childcare needs. And so we have people working from home who also are trying to take care of their children, which is a problem. And then that continued through the summer with the decline in available summer camps and programs. So as we are sitting here now, most of our schools are back in person, but what's going to happen in the future is still a little bit unknown. Are there going to be the same number of childcare programs? Is there going to be the same availability for childcare? Do we have employees that need that flexibility, even if it's not to be there with their child all day long, but rather, not to have the commute so that they can get their kids to and from a modified daycare or childcare program? Those are things that should be assessed if we know that a good chunk of our workplace is in that position. Another issue here is that there might be people that have the ability to complete their job duties much more effectively from home, and there are some people that can't. So when we're looking at who to return to the workplace, and we're looking at it on a personal level as opposed to just a sheer business needs level, there might be some people that have been chomping at the bit to come back to work, and you haven't brought them back because of the MIOSHA rule prohibiting in-person work to the extent it can be performed feasibly remotely. So you might have a situation where you're not going to be returning many people, but you have a handful of employees that really do need to come back because they are not performing for whatever reason at home, or they believe they will perform better. So that's an easy one, right? If there's somebody that's just lacking the ability and we've pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, now we can get those people back in the workplace. Another consideration, and this is something that we're going to talk about throughout the program, but it's accommodations. So when you're trying to figure out who are we going to return, you should not be overlooking people that might need an accommodation or assuming that you don't have to engage in that process anymore. And I will let Laura talk more about accommodations in the back end of this presentation. So again, you're considering your business needs, you're considering your people needs, and then we're looking at, we go on to the next slide. People, as I mentioned, that have been gone, or people that you might have to lay off. So this is, again, a good time for companies to assess overall business needs. And what we've seen a lot of is a large chunk of furloughed workers or people that were laid off, and businesses have sort of just kept them in that status. So if you're looking at, okay, now we have new rules, we have new guidance, we're going to be going, we're moving forward, we're restructuring. You just want to make sure that everybody's aware that if you're doing a layoff or if you're cutting bait with furloughed workers because it's just not going to work to bring them back anymore, that you consider warn. Okay, so there have been some decisions, not out of Michigan that I've seen yet, but out of other jurisdictions, that COVID-19 does not negate the requirements of WARN. So we always want to consider the WARN Act, which provides that certain notice requirements in the event of a mass layoff or a plant closing. You want to look at disparate impact to make sure that you don't have a group of furloughed or laid off workers who are going to be disproportionately impacted in terms of a protected trait. So what I mean by that is if you have a group of 10 people that you furloughed or that you've laid off, and you've ultimately decided not to bring them back, and the average age of those 10 people is 58, and the average age of the workforce that is returning is 42, they could have a disparate impact type of age claim, saying that even though you created this neutral policy of eliminating these positions, it just so happens that it's disproportionately impacting your older workforce. You want to look for that. You want to look for intentional discrimination claims. If it's 1, 2, 3 people and they all fall into a protected trait, or somebody has been furloughed or laid off and they're not going to be recalled, but that position is going to be refilled. Okay, that's a big area of concern. Laying somebody off and hoping that they've gone on to new employment or they forgot about you is something that happens a lot. And so what I see as a big red flag is when there's a layoff and I have, Sally, who's a protected person who's been complaining about disability discrimination and has gone on a leave every single year that she's been employed with my company. Sally's out on layoff and she's been laid off for 9 months. And ultimately the COO says, we need to fill Sally's position, but there's no chance. And you know what? I'm bringing Sally back. So let's get a posting out there. Let's get it filled. Everybody hopes that Sally will never see it. Sally hears about it from her friend Bobby. And before you know it, you have a disability discrimination and retaliation lawsuit. So don't assume that because somebody's been laid off or furloughed due to COVID, that you are somehow insulated from a subsequent claim, because failure to recall is a big trigger for employment related claims right now. And then of course, if you're going to go through RIFs or laying off furloughed workers, always consider whether a severance program is appropriate. If you do a severance program for group layoff decisions, please know that there are specific requirements under the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act. Make sure that any release and waiver of age claims are enforceable. So if that's something you decide to do, don't just rush out like a quick, easy release, because those have to be technically compliant. So again, when we're looking at this, these are some common sense things here, right? But when I'm talking to businesses about who they're going to return and when and why, we're always looking at functions. We're always looking at who's got the best performance evaluations, who's got the most flexible skills, who can perform a wide variety, who's the right person for the right seat is one way to look at it. What positions do we need for the current job? As we return people to the workplace now in May, your business might look very, very different than it looked in March 2020. I know that's a pretty common thing, right? I talk to many clients who have had record-breaking years, but their business model is dramatically different now. So again, what position do we need? And if you're bringing some people back and not bringing other people back, and they're going to be mad about it, make sure that you have your analysis documented. Because if you get faced with a lawsuit because you've returned people to the workplace and you haven't returned others, or you laid people off, or you've not recalled people from furlough, it's going to be your burden to establish why. So the only way we can do that is if it's in writing. As lawyers love to tell you, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So I am a big fan of communication. Now we're going to get into some of the more timely topics in a few slides, dealing with the mask mandates and what if somebody doesn't want to work in person and now they're going to. In my opinion, the best way to address some of those issues is to have clear communication and to get in front of what you know will be the primary questions. Okay, so if we're dealing just with returning people back to work and we're setting aside masks and we're setting aside vaccinations for now, okay, we're going to get into all of that in a second. If we've gone through our business analysis and we've ultimately decided that this is what we're going to do, I am a big proponent of firm, company, business-wide communications where we are transparent about the plan, about when it's going to go into effect and why, okay? And always emphasize the positives as opposed to starting with, we know many of you are going to be unhappy with this. We know many of you love working from home and we're sorry, but do it the other way around, right? So we're going to emphasize the positives that, we have these new programs. We are so excited to get back to our team related atmosphere, that we're going to have these weekly meetings, whatever is positive, whatever makes sense, okay? Because if somebody is sitting at home in a customer service role, answering phone calls from 8 to 5 and is doing a fine job, they're going to want to know, why do I need to come back to work? And what are you getting from me there that you're not getting from me here, where I can avoid a commute and save on lunches and all that other good stuff. Okay. So you want to explain why and what this is going to do for them, right? We expect that it's going to increase our productivity. We're going to improve our on-time leads, all of those things. And that's going to have a downstream effect on our employees. Emphasize that. We also want to make sure to note right from the gate what the safety precautions are going to be, which goes hand in glove with the mask and the vaccination stuff that Stacy and Laura are going to be discussing in a second. But I like to note, we're gonna have these guards up, we're gonna have these markings, we're gonna do the daily screening, we're gonna do audits, we're gonna do assessments, whatever we can possibly do. And then whenever there's an email like that, you need to have a central person. Okay. So please, if you're doing a communication about, we're so grateful that we see the light at the end of the tunnel, everybody's coming back to work on May 25th. Can't wait to see you all. Make sure there's a specific person that if somebody has questions or concerns, they go to. Okay, even if you're a small business with 10 people, the last thing you want is employees talking to random managers, supervisors, or coworkers about problems or issues. And you have managers, supervisors, or coworkers that aren't well-versed in issues like ADA accommodations or COVID leave requirements or vaccination requirements, because you are going to have misinformation and you are going to have rumors spreading like wildfire. So make sure that there is one specific person or maybe two specific people to whom complaints or concerns can go to with email addresses and phone numbers. And what you should also do is make sure that managers or supervisors that will likely get the blowback are funneling all of those communications to human resources or to the designated point person. Many times what we're seeing is there's a communication that goes out, there's an employee that goes to the supervisor and the employee talk, the supervisor is not sharing a consistent message that human resources or executive leadership would, and you've got a breakdown that causes a big problem. Okay, so everything should go funneling to a centralized repository, as I would call it. But the communication from the get-go, again, and we'll talk more about more specific communications at the back end, but there should be a generalized, this is our plan, we're transparent, focusing on the positives only, not talking about gripers, and then having a very particular person to whom complaints or concerns should be made. And John, if you can get me my next slide. All right. Okay, so when we talk about how to return, okay, so again, we went from, are we returning? What are our business needs? Are we concerned about carving out particular employees? Then we get to the, how are we going to do this theoretically? There are multiple ways. If you are returning people, I am a big proponent of staggered shifts, so to speak, or staggered bringbacks. So like my husband's company, where there's 150 people in an open concept, very modern work environment, are starting with, July 1st, they're going to have people back 2 days a week. And then they're going on August 1st to 3, and then after Labor Day to 4. And then after a certain amount of tenure, there's more flexibility. So long story short, you're giving yourself the opportunity to identify potential problem areas and not have a huge influx of people and then potentially an outbreak. We don't know what exactly is going to happen with the variants, although the numbers have been very encouraging. You never know. You don't necessarily want to, if you can avoid it, have a huge influx and then a huge exodus because of a problem or an inconsistency. So I'm a proponent of gradually staggered approaches, but it's really up to the business and what makes the most sense. My concern right now, as we sit here on May 20th at 8:51, and we have no guidance from MIOSHA, is that if you bring back everybody to the workplace on May 24th, so say you have 75 employees and you've had 15 working in person and you've had 60 working out at home or wherever, and you're going to say on Monday, we're bringing everybody back, 75 people in here, doors are open. And then on Tuesday or Wednesday, MIOSHA comes out with rules regarding distancing, regarding certain safeguards, administrative controls or engineering controls, having to have like plexiglass shields up, having to have capacity limitations, having to continue the screening requirements, which are still in full force and effect. It might be extraordinarily difficult to have 75 people in one workplace and totally compliant with all of the, as we sit here today, unknown rules, right? So you bring back 15 people, it's much easier if there's some dramatic shift or change to ensure compliance and not to send mixed messages. What I don't want are my clients bringing everybody back and then having to be like, ooh, whoops, and send everybody home, okay? Or a big chunk of people home, or dramatically change the way they're doing business. That's not an ideal scenario for anybody. So just something to think about. Again, hopefully MIOSHA will come out with something today. An update for those that are not aware, Governor Whitmer is doing a discussion at, I think, 11:30, either 11:15 or 11:30, where she's expected to ease certain restrictions. So who knows, maybe MIOSHA will follow on the heels of that discussion. But again, if you're bringing people back, our staged approach is probably the best way to do it for now until we know more. And speaking of some of those restrictions, we go to the next slide. All right, so right now there's an emergency rule in place, right? So MIOSHA emergency rules, everybody probably knows those. What a nightmare that's been. They came out last year in October. They were effective for 6 months until April 14th. They were renewed for another 6 months. So they are effective through October right now. Okay, so we have an October deadline with those emergency rules. They can only be modified, amended, rescinded by MIOSHA. Governor Whitmer does not have the authority or ability to come in and tell MIOSHA, that's no longer compliant. MIOSHA has to come out and do it itself. So as of right now, the emergency rules are still in effect. And one of those rules requires you to have a COVID-19 preparedness and response plan that addresses a number of factors, your risk assessment, your protocols, your administrative safeguards, your engineering safeguards. So if you are bringing people back and you haven't had people in the workplace, I'm willing to bet that your COVID-19 preparedness and response plan will not be accurate after you bring people back. So you need to make sure that you are updating that and you have that ready to go, unless, which could easily happen, MIOSHA comes out and says it's no longer required. But as of right now, you've got to make sure that your COVID plan is going to be consistent with what you're actually doing, and you're looking at the physical capacity of the workplace as well to be sure that you're complying with all those other CDC recommendations, but most importantly, MIOSHA emergency rules that are still in full force and effect. So with that said, I'm going to kick it to Stacy, if we can go to the next slide here, who's going to talk about the hot news, mask update. Oh, Stacy, you're muted.
Try that. You'd think I'd have that down by now. Thanks, Courtney. So we're going to do our best here to talk about the timeline that's happened. And as Courtney said, we're still waiting with bated breath on MIOSHA's update with this. But we're going to let you know here, just review real quick of what's happened in the last approximately week. So on May 13th, the CDC came out with their new guidance for masks and specifically about fully vaccinated people. As all of you are probably aware, a fully vaccinated person, according to the CDC, is someone who is 2 weeks out after their last vaccine dose. So if they're on Johnson & Johnson, that's 2 weeks after their one dose. And if they're Moderna or Pfizer, that's 2 weeks after that second dose. And so according to the CDC, fully vaccinated people no longer need to wear a mask or physically distance in any setting. So we're talking indoors or out, except where required by federal, state, local, or tribal laws, rules, regulations, including local businesses and workplace guidances. So leaving some flexibility there for what businesses need to decide for their specific environments. Fully vaccinated folks with no symptoms and no known exposure are going to be, under the CDC guidance, exempted from routine screening programs. So again, this is under CDC's recent guidance. With this is what Michigan employers are currently required to follow. And Governor Whitmer directed fully vaccinated Michiganders to follow the CDC guidelines. Under that, unvaccinated people are still expected to continue practicing everyday preventative actions. So we're still talking about masks on unvaccinated folks, social distancing 6 feet apart, and avoiding poorly ventilated areas, washing our hands and sanitizing. So that's, again, what some of those things that workplaces still need to think about when you have a workforce that still includes unvaccinated people or guests coming in and out that are unvaccinated. You still need to be able to provide for these things. Go to the next slide. So following CDC guidance, we then have the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services on May 15th, stating again, fully vaccinated individuals do not need to wear a mask indoors or outdoors. It's going to continue the gathering restrictions and contact tracing under very specific conditions. and no longer enforce face mask requirements outdoors. And if fully vaccinated, not requiring face masks indoors. With that, we of course are already getting a number of questions about how is a business supposed to determine who's vaccinated and who's not, whether that be with employees or with guests that are coming in and out. With the MDHHS and what they're saying is under their May 15th, they're requiring that businesses make a good faith effort to ensure that all persons in their establishment, including employees, comply with the indoor face mask guidance. Good faith effort, according to MDHHS, is posting things like posting a sign notifying people that wearing a mask is required unless that person is fully vaccinated, and asking patrons, and asking patrons not wearing masks, whether or not they are fully vaccinated, will count as a good faith effort. You can also require face masks of all patrons and employees, but again, these are types of things that would be considered good faith effort. So if you're posting a sign and advertising to people that your expectation is that people that are in your business that are not vaccinated are wearing a sign, that will comply. Now, we just want to make a note here. They're saying a good faith effort. That sets the floor. You as people in charge of businesses or your workforce need to make a determination of what's best for your environment. And again, this is a floor, then it's got to allow for businesses to do what's best for them and what's best for your employees, because we all know that you're all going to be hearing about your employees, whether or not they're comfortable or whether or not guests in your establishments are comfortable based on the decisions you make. So just keep that in mind. And then as of yesterday, believe me, we've been watching close to see whether MIOSHA has specific guidance out or not. At this point, their website is advertising that they are in the process of reviewing both the emergency rules that Courtney mentioned are still in play right now and are still valid. And they're also reviewing and as many of you have heard, drafting permanent rules. So there's some conversation about that. MIOSHA is saying continued requirements for masks when employees cannot maintain 6 feet of social distancing or in common areas, regardless of vaccination status. However, they're also on their website have said, and there's a statement that says that until MIOSHA posts their new rules, they are looking to CDC recent guidance on face masks for fully vaccinated people. And until the new rules come out for MIOSHA, a business complying with MDHHS and CDC will be considered making a good faith effort to comply. I think now I'm kicking it over to Laura here.
Thanks, Stacy. So now, after you've assessed your needs and you know what the rules are as of this exact moment in time, and you're going to have to keep up with it as we go on, but now you get to the point where how do you bring people back into your workplace? Courtney talked a little bit about that, and I want to follow up on it. It's a really good idea to get your plan together and give people some time to adjust to it, especially those that are going to have to, make arrangements for people at home, whether they're elderly, whether they're kids. Give them a few weeks to plan, just like you're going to need that same period of time to plan what's going to happen in the workspace. So come up with the plan, communicate it, do your COVID-19 plan, as Courtney said, update it. You need a safety plan, social distancing, personal hygiene, PPE, regular cleanings in the workplace. Communicate to people whether they're going to be in person or remote or some hybrid of that. Remind them to bring back, if people that returning to the workplace need to bring back their computers, their chairs, their extra monitors, anything they brought home with them to work remotely, that all needs to come back to work. So, give people a heads up on that. There's going to be a lot of things that it's in a way, I think you're going to have people like they're new to the workforce because they've been out of the office for so long. It'll be like one big training of everybody again when they get back in the office on even just the most basic things. And I would encourage you to invite feedback from your employees, and give them a specific point person in HR or their manager. But to the extent that you can address issues before people get brought back into the workplace, I think it'll be smoother for everyone. And they may raise concerns that you haven't anticipated. And if you get that interaction going early, just encourage them if they have concerns or questions to address them to you sooner rather than later. And it may help you formulate your plan for everybody. And as a side note, that especially includes people who might need accommodations. And so by putting out there that if you have any concerns, it's a broad, open-ended term, but it should encourage people who might need a reasonable accommodation and might be entitled to it under the ADA, which we'll talk about a little further down, to come to you, because there are going to be a lot of those issues raised. I think they were raised in the beginning and then they kind of laid down because most people were sent home from work and it wasn't an issue, but now it's going to become an issue again. So if you do have furloughed employees that you're going to bring back, it's almost, not quite, but almost like onboarding them again. So you should send them an offer letter, basically offering them to return them to work, give them a date, explain what position they're coming back to, especially if it's changed since they were put out on furlough. Courtney talked a little bit about a good time to assess and reorganize your workplace if that's necessary. So any changes to that person's position should be outlined in the letter. Tell them what their position will be, what the pay will be, whether they're exempt or non-exempt. Can we have the next slide, John? If their benefit information has been impacted, how did you treat PTO, sick leave, things like that when they left? Were there, how was their health insurance handled? Were you paying it? Were they on COBRA? Those types of things. Explain to them how that's going to be reinstated or work, or what their banks are when they come back. Give them information on requesting accommodations, and especially if you have new policies in the workplace, which everyone probably is going to. Your COVID plan is going to be a new policy if people haven't been in the workplace. Your expectation of cleaning their office space, staying out of the kitchen when other people are in there, whatever it is, wiping down the Xerox machine if they use it. Those are all new policies, whether they're in your handbook or not. So it's a good idea to put that in writing and send it out with these offer letters to your furloughed employees. If people are in positions where they require retraining, if they have certification requirements or anything like that, you need to consider that and make provisions either to put it on them that they need to get that retraining done online, whatever it is, or you're going to offer to retrain people, but put that information in your letters. And then again, give out contact, a point person in HR for any questions. And then with respect to every employee, the last segment pretty much went to furlough. There's some crossover, but so you have the rest of your workforce has been working, but from home. So you need to communicate to each employee whether they're going to be expected to return to the office or workplace full-time immediately, whether they're going to rotate on a set schedule. Some places are doing, Monday, Tuesday in the office for half the workforce, Wednesday to clean, Thursday, Friday, the other half comes into the office. So if they're going to be in a rotating schedule, you want to tell them. If they're going to continue working remotely indefinitely, or in some cases permanently, you want to communicate that to your employees. So the other thing that we've talked about briefly is reasonable accommodations. And I think that most of you on the call are pretty familiar with the term and hopefully the interactive process. But anybody who indicates that they have a health risk or any kind of disability that is going to interfere with their ability to return to work in the office or do portions of their job, it should be viewed by you as a request for accommodation, even if that's not what they call it. If you're on notice that they need something to assist them in being able to do their job going forward due to a medical condition, your flags need to go up and you need to engage in the interactive process. And the interactive process is a back and forth where the employee is supposed to ask for accommodations, some kind of special help, whether it can be anything. It can be a mat to stand on, better software, working from home. You're going to get a lot of working from homes, I think, is what the main request for accommodation is going to be right now. But in any event, then as the employer, if you have enough information to know that they do have a qualifying disability and would qualify for an accommodation and the request seems reasonable and you're able to deal with it, then you can just work with them to come up with what that accommodation will look like. If you don't have enough information to know that they truly have a disability, or you don't know how that claimed disability would impact their ability to perform the essential functions of their job, you as the employer can ask for further information from their medical provider, but it's a very risky area, if you will, for an employer. So you need to contact your employment lawyer to walk you through that. But basically, they will draft a letter addressed to the doctor, but it's sent through the employee, and it has to be very, very specifically tailored to the exact issue that's being addressed. You can't just send out for general medical information about the person or their condition. So you're allowed to get specific medical information to help you through the interactive process. And the thing that sometimes employers don't remember is that while an employer has to engage in the interactive process, if you don't and the EEOC comes in, you're going to lose, because you don't have to give the accommodation if there turns out not to be a reasonable accommodation or it's an undue hardship. But if you don't go through the interactive process, you have violated the ADA. So you always have to go through the process. The end result may be that there is no reasonable accommodation or it's an undue hardship to provide it. So you may not end up having to accommodate the person, but you have to go through the interactive process. So take that away with you right now. And another side thing that we have seen with COVID, at least in the beginning, and I anticipate we're going to start seeing it again, is it's a very difficult situation to deal with when what we're seeing is employees themselves don't have disabilities, but they have someone at home that's vulnerable and maybe can't get vaccinated, and they don't want to be in the workplace to bring home COVID to them, to have that risk. You're going to see caretaker type requests for reasonable accommodations. And under the ADA, that is not a third party disability is not a reason to give a person a reasonable accommodation. So just anticipate you're going to get those requests and think about how you're going to respond to them. You are not required to give a reasonable accommodation for someone to stay home and be a caregiver. Unlike the Family Medical Leave Act, under the Family Medical Leave Act, they would probably, depending on the situation, have the right to stay home and be a caretaker for the 12 weeks if necessary. But that analysis is complicated also. But I just want you to take away that if they're seeking accommodations for a third person, basically, that is not covered under the ADA. So just another thing to put on your plate to think about. All right. So as you're returning employees, you should update all of your policies, go through your handbook, think about things that have changed. Obviously, the COVID situation and, even everything from do you now need to stagger lunch hours instead of having one solid lunch hour where everybody goes from 12 to 1? Now, do you need to stagger it so you can space people out? Again, people have been home for a year and a half. You're going to have to remind them you have a dress code. Look at your dress code. Is it necessary or does it need tweaking? Can you loosen it up a little bit? If you can't, then you really better remind people, because it's I would submit that it's pretty rare that what people have been wearing at home is what they would generally wear to work. And they've probably forgotten that. And if they're like some of us, they might not even fit into those clothes. So again, give them a heads up while they're still at home that the dress code's going to apply and what it is. Security issues, if they need new passes, things like that. Again, consider breaks and lunches. If your COVID plan requires COVID screenings every day for unvaccinated people, relay that to people and remind them they're going to have to do that. So when employees return, unless we get different guidance from the CDC and MIOSHA and the Department of Health, currently, you are still going to have to enforce testing and symptom assessment protocols for non-vaccinated people. Vaccinated people no longer are going to have to do a daily symptom assessment, get tested, unless they are suffering from symptoms. If they've just been exposed, they're supposed to watch themselves for 14 days to make sure they don't develop symptoms. If they do develop symptoms, they go get tested, but otherwise they don't have to quarantine, they don't have to get tested, they don't have to do a daily symptom assessment protocol, but unvaccinated employees do. So you're going to have those policies in place, and you're going to have to put them out there and make sure the people who are unvaccinated know that and are following them. Quarantine policy, again, for those with symptoms, positive test result or exposure if unvaccinated, you follow the CDC guidelines. You also have to follow Public Act 339 of 2020, which is the Michigan law that prohibits employers from discriminating against employees who have to quarantine or isolate. It was passed back in October of 2020 and then updated in December of 2020, and it's still in effect. So don't forget that that is out there. You're going to have to make a philosophical decision whether you require masks or no masks in your workplace. You can require them. I mean, the general rule is they're not required unless you're unvaccinated, but as a private business, you can mandate that everybody wear masks. It's a tough call. Everyone's on the honor system under this. There's not a great way to tell. You can have people bring in their cards and show you. I think we're going to get to that a little further, but you're going to have to make a decision on masks, no mask, what your mask policy is going to be. And you're going to have to determine if you're going to allow in-person meetings in your workplace, no meetings, even if people are in the workplace. Do you want them to meet by Zoom instead of getting together in the same room? You're going to have to make decisions like that. Okay, so vaccinations. Can you mandate it? Yes, you can. Is it appropriate or necessary for your workplace to mandate it? A lot of healthcare providers, depending on the situation, do mandate vaccines and always have, and they're continuing that with COVID. Frankly, in today's job market, most employers are leery of mandating simply because people can walk down the street and get another job. There are so many jobs out there and not enough employees to fill them. And I think that, at least in my area, that's the biggest reason employers are not mandating, because they don't want to lose their workforce. And there is certainly a group of people out there that are resistant to getting vaccinated. But there are places where it might be appropriate or necessary, and the law allows you to mandate it, but it's hard to enforce. How do you enforce it? Some considerations: if you're going to mandate it, do you need to pay them to go get vaccinated? Do you have to pay them for time off to recover if somebody has, you know, some kind of reaction to the vaccine? A lot of people have a 12-hour period after the Moderna where they don't feel good and wouldn't want to come to work. I think that a lot of employers that I'm aware of, well, I don't even know a lot that are mandating it, but if they do mandate it or strongly encourage it, they are paying for the time off to get the vaccine. Some employers, our health department is very on top of it, and they have now, they went to walk-in on-demand clinics a few weeks ago, and last week they started encouraging places of employment to just call them up, and they'll come in, and the health department will come in and vaccinate whoever shows up at your workplace, your customers, your workforce, whatever. So, you know, if you do that, they're on working time and they're going to get paid, but you can consider paying them or for going to get the vaccine and then for recovery time. And if you're going to mandate it, you can ask for proof of vaccination from anyone. And I think there's another slide that talks about this, but if you are going to mandate it, the only thing you can ask the employees for is proof that they got the vaccination. Don't ask for any other medical information, just proof of the vaccine. You never want medical information other than directly related to the issue at hand. You don't want to end up with a GINA violation. So keep that in mind. I think most people believe that encouraging voluntary vaccinations is the way to go. That encouragement takes a lot of different forms. It's right now, I think a lot of employers are recognizing that it's monetary, it's becoming the way to go in some way, shape, or form. There's some creative ways that people are handling it out there. You can offer incentives. The EEOC says it's fine, but you can't offer too big of an incentive. And if you're going to mandate or strongly encourage by offering incentives, you have to remember that you have to accommodate and you can't discriminate against individuals with disabilities that aren't able to get the vaccination or those with bona fide religious objections. And if you have religious objections, there are criteria out there to determine if it's a bona fide religious objection, but you might need help navigating that field. So if you get such an objection and you're skeptical, then contact your attorney because you could need help navigating that field. You are allowed to ask for proof of vaccination. So if you have employees coming back into the workplace and you're going to allow them to be maskless if they have been vaccinated, you can require them to show you their vaccination card. You can make a copy of it and you put it in their healthcare file, not their personnel record, but you should have separate medical records anyway. So you just keep a copy in there. And so you can have a mask rule that if you've been shown proof of vaccination, they don't have to wear a mask. If you haven't been shown it, they do have to wear a mask. I think that covers that slide, John. Can we? Oh, that was it. So I know we have a lot of questions.
Yes.
A couple creative things I just want to throw out there. I have an employer that decided to tackle the lack of vaccination for people that get COVID and need to quarantine. I don't know how many of you know this, but you still are able to get a tax credit for giving people the 2 weeks off to quarantine up until September 30th. It was extended again. First, it was till March 15th, and now it's September 30th. It's not required, but you can still get a tax credit if you choose to give that time off paid. So I have a client that has decided that if people are vaccinated but still get sick or are told by a healthcare provider to quarantine for some reason, that he will pay them for that time off because they've been vaccinated. If he has unvaccinated employees who have to quarantine, they can quarantine. He's not violating Public Act 339, but they're not going to get paid for it. And if he has people who aren't vaccinated, have to quarantine, and decide maybe they should get vaccinated and they start the process, then it's kind of a give and take, and he'll consider maybe meeting them halfway and paying for half the quarantine period if they actually do go through and get it. And another creative way I've heard is sort of along the lines of how Governor Whitmer set out the percentages of vaccination tied to reopening. This employer is tying percentage of vaccinated employees across the board to monetary bonuses. So if, say, 55% of the workforce gets vaccinated, then everyone across the board gets $25, say. If 65% of the workforce across the board gets vaccinated, they get another $25. And then if 75% or 80% or whatever your number is gets vaccinated across the board, everyone gets another $50. And so it kind of takes the pressure off the employer and puts a little bit of peer pressure on those non-vaccinated people, because the vaccinated employees want that reward for getting vaccinated, and they need their coworkers to step up and get vaccinated too. So, there's a lot of things. Just let your mind run wild on how to come up with those incentives so you get your workforce vaccinated and can get back to the job of working.
Right, and that's a question that we're sort of getting a lot of, which is related to vaccination programs, vaccination requirements. So the question that's come up a lot is about vaccination cards. But just so we can emphasize that, there has been some inconsistent guidance regarding HIPAA and how HIPAA provides to vaccination cards. So everybody's aware, right? HIPAA is going to govern protected health information, and is going to prohibit covered entities from disclosing that protected health information without consent. Okay, so if you are a covered entity, you can't obtain and then disclose HIPAA information without an individual's consent. So healthcare companies, insurance companies, entities that are maintaining PHI obviously have HIPAA obligations. But it is not a HIPAA violation to ask somebody to provide a vaccination card as part of an employment program, or to obtain a benefit related to not having to wear a mask, or to get an incentive pay. So that's why when you have a mandatory or an incentivized vaccination program, you can say something along the lines of, you show us your vaccination card and you're going to get a $100 gift card, or you're going to get an extra PTO day. That's not a violation of HIPAA. Now, if you are a covered entity and you get vaccination cards and then you start disclosing them, you would have some HIPAA concerns there. Likewise, if you're dealing with guests and you're not a covered entity and you have guests coming in and out, or visitors coming in and out, there's not a rule that says if you ask for proof of vaccination to comply with an internal policy, you are somehow violating HIPAA. But that's going to be trickier. Okay, it's one thing to ask employees in exchange for an incentive to provide information regarding their vaccination status. It's another to go around and ask visitors or guests or contractors to show you their vaccination card. And the latter is where you're going to have a lot of pushback. Under current rules, you do not have to do any of those things. Okay, under the current rules, if you want to relax your mask requirements and you want to make it clear that fully vaccinated people do not have to wear a mask inside, all you have to do is post signage stating that you are expected to wear a mask unless you are fully vaccinated or medically exempt. If you post that signage, you have complied in good faith with the MDHHS order. And right now, MIOSHA is taking the position that compliance with the MDHHS order satisfies their emergency rule regarding face coverage. Okay, so it's totally up to your business what you want to do. We wanted to emphasize that. Again, covered entities with healthcare or with HIPAA obligations, it's a little bit trickier. But if it's, hey, show us proof, you'll get this incentive. Show us proof, we'll be able to ensure that you're complying with our policy. It's a different ball of wax. You don't want to get into anything beyond that, as Laura mentioned. Likewise, we're hoping that MIOSHA, when they come out with their rules, and who knows when that may or may not be, but when they come out with their rules, they'll provide some more particular record keeping requirements. Because if MIOSHA, for example, says, if you have this program where employees don't have to wear a mask, then you have a record keeping obligation to verify that they've been vaccinated. That makes it really easy. So you're not getting pushback from your employees saying, this is HIPAA, I don't want to give you all that info. So hopefully MIOSHA will do us all a solid and make that, a parameter that we have to follow through on. With regard to the question of whether, speaking of MIOSHA, you have to follow MIOSHA or CDC. Okay. The MIOSHA emergency rules, as we sit here today, are in full force and effect. All right. So there are certain MIOSHA rules that have nothing to do with certain CDC guidelines and vice versa. What has happened is Governor Whitmer has adopted the CDC guidelines regarding masks into the state of Michigan's mask order. And then MIOSHA has said their emergency rule as it relates to masks is going to follow the state of Michigan mask order. Okay, so the mask rule right now, from MIOSHA's perspective, is the same as the CDC guideline. So they're consistent in that regard. But MIOSHA has particular emergency rules beyond what the CDC is saying that are still in full force and effect that you still have to follow. Okay, so if you're looking at, are we compliant? The place you should start with is the MIOSHA emergency rules. And then if you want to go beyond that to see if there's any additional CDC guidelines, you can, but MIOSHA is incorporating most of that anyway. And hopefully, like I said, it could be today that we get these rules. We were really, really hoping that we would have them before this morning, but such is life. So that's what we need to look out for. Another question, a lot of these are just asking about people being vaccinated or not. So part of that is going to depend on company culture and where you're at. Like some companies are taking a hands-off approach. You guys have seen the headlines. Some companies, I know Meijer made statements, Kroger came out yesterday, Trader Joe's has, it's the honor system, okay? Many companies are taking that approach. What you want to do with your private business and your employees is a business decision. Many companies are also taking the approach, we're not changing anything, okay? It's mask for everybody until we have specific guidelines from MIOSHA or there are permanent rules that come out, or we feel comfortable, maybe after Memorial Day or after 4th of July. And if you want to do that, you are 1000% within your rights to just continue on and say, we're not changing anything. This is what we're doing. Another question that we got that's not related to mask and mandatory vaccinations, but it's, what do you do if a staff member says that they're afraid to come in, even when you've assured them that you're following all the safety standards? The case that Laura talked about, they have a family member who can't get vaccinated. They have somebody that's at a particularly high risk that can't get vaccinated. If it's the individual's disability, you have to provide an accommodation, but you don't have to provide an accommodation, as Laura mentioned, to somebody who knows somebody that has a disability. Okay, so it doesn't extend down that line. At that point, it becomes a matter of company policy, what the person's position is. We had this back in March when the pandemic first hit, and a lot of people just plain didn't want to work because they were scared, they were fearful. If they have a particularized anxiety disorder that triggers, FMLA leave or ADA accommodations, then they would have coverage. But otherwise, it's unfortunately going to come to a difficult decision for some people, which is, do you want to work here or not? And to Laura's point, with our current job market, although that might sound like a great question to ask employers from management's perspective, right? Let's give them this ultimatum. I would caution everybody, just realize that it's going to be hard to get employees in right away. And there is a cost to turnover because we are seeing companies just struggle to staff. And especially with the unemployment benefits continuing to be extended and the additional stimulus benefits that are going out, the job market right now is extraordinarily difficult for companies. So just a consideration, if ultimatums are going to be placed, whether it's related to vaccination, whether it's related to mask usage, whether it's related to remote work or in-person work, always consider not just the legal effects of those decisions, but the practical effects when we're living in the world that we're living in right now. Let me see if there are any more. So here, is requiring proof of vaccination a HIPAA gray area? So this is the thing with HIPAA, right? So again, when you look at protected health information, the vaccination card is probably close enough to meet the definition of protected health information. But HIPAA prohibits covered entities from disclosing, misusing protected health information. Okay, so it's a law that was specifically enacted to keep your doctor from losing your health data, okay, and to keep a hospital from sending it around without your authorization. It does not prohibit employees from voluntarily disclosing that. It does not prohibit non-covered entities from asking questions that might implicate HIPAA. This is why when you have an employee that's disabled and is asking for an accommodation, there's never been an assertion that you can't get medical information because it's HIPAA protected, right? That's not how it works. If you're modifying a workplace policy for an employee because of a medical issue, you can get the medical documentation. So,
Courtney, employers are actually specifically exempted from HIPAA. If medical information is obtained by an employer for employment purposes, it is actually specifically exempted under HIPAA. It's not part of HIPAA.
So you need, so you just make sure that it's clear that this is for an employment purpose. This is for compliance with or exception from our policies. Again, now businesses asking about customers and visitors and non-employees about vaccination cards, even though a savvy attorney could probably make an argument that too doesn't implicate HIPAA, you're going to have more just PR pushback, and you're going to have just a bigger logjam with that issue than you are from an employment perspective. If you, as a private employer, want to create a policy whereby employees can only wear masks or can only work without a mask upon showing that they've been vaccinated, you are within your rights as a private employer to create that policy. The question is whether you want to, based on the culture and the dynamic of your workforce and the potential fallout. And if you do go down that road, are you prepared for dealing with employees? Because you are going to 1000% get employees saying, this is HIPAA, this is my medical information, I don't have to give anything to you. Okay, so if you're going to go that route, you can always blame it on the lawyers. You can find articles that discuss this as well, that talk about employers' rights. You can find the exemption if you really need to. But this is the most common question that we're getting. And again, it's not a HIPAA issue if it's for an employment purpose. It's HIPAA is limited in scope and in interpretation. Yeah, so and the question, that's where I was aiming towards in an employer response. So you're going to get employees that are going to, I know it, Laura knows it, JC knows it, right? We're seeing that already. Employees saying like, this is insanity. I shouldn't have to wear masks are ineffective, or the vice versa, right? I have had employees on both sides say like, how am I coming to work if I know that people are not going to be wearing a mask and they're not vaccinated? They're just going to say I'm vaccinated so that they can get out of it. And the other side, people saying that masks are totally useless and that we're living in some crazy world. Okay, so you're going to have those. It's been extraordinarily polarizing and politicized, which is a recipe for disaster. So whatever you decide, make sure that you're prepared for the fallout either way. And if the decision is we're going maskless and we're just going to have signs and we're just going to comply with MDHHS, then I would have that order. So when you have employees that are saying, what are you doing? You're not protecting me. You're prepared to go by showing them the order and demonstrating compliance. If you go the opposite way, make sure you got that HIPAA exemption language handy and that you have a script so that everybody can consistently explain why we're doing this, that this is an employment program, this is a modification of our policy. We need this information as your employer to maintain, our consistent safety and workplace policies. I think we've addressed all the questions. If anybody wants to even just like chime in, by all means.
There's one here, Courtney. With summer vacation coming up, is childcare still an issue we have to make accommodations for due to COVID? You do not have to accommodate people for childcare issues. However, the tax credit is still available to you if you have employees who haven't used their full 12 weeks of the Extended Family Medical Leave Act. It's still available until the end of September 30th of this year. It's not mandatory. Employers don't have to allow it, but if you do allow it, you can take the tax credit. So it's up to you. It's not mandatory that you give time off for childcare anymore.
Another question here is, what about thoughts on reassigning an individual who's not vaccinated because they work with children who are not able to get vaccinated? So again, if you can demonstrate that there's a legitimate business reason for the reassignment, the issue that you might have, and I'll let Laura sort of piggyback on this a little bit, is disability claims. So for example, if the individual says that they're not vaccinated because of a disability, and you're reassigning them is a discriminatory action because you're taking an adverse employment action against them because of their disability, you could have some pushback there. So I would want to make sure that you're not running into that area, and that you can demonstrate the objective, legitimate business need, even if it's perhaps on a temporary basis. If you're getting customer complaints or client complaints, and you can demonstrate that this is not just you being overly protective, but that you've had this actual demonstration. You know, I represent a dental practice, and the issue they were having is that many patients were calling in and saying they only wanted hygienists who had been vaccinated, and they wanted proof that the hygienist had been vaccinated. And so there were certain hygienists that were not vaccinated, and what happened was they just couldn't schedule them. And it got to the point where it was sort of again, an ultimatum here as it relates to, like, we have patients who are making particularized requests. What are we doing here? So disabilities with non-vaccinations are the tricky part. If it's just a political stance or personal stance, you don't have to worry about those type of discriminatory claims. Laura, do you have anything to add on to that as it relates to?
Yeah, it's a really tricky job-specific, situation-specific question. So I don't think we can give a black and white answer. The other issue that arises there is if a person with a disability causes an undue threat of harm to themselves or others in the workplace, but it almost be reversed in that situation. So I would get specific help on that. It's very difficult given the fact situation to be able to assess it, but it is a business decision. If the person, not getting a vaccination is in and of itself not a disability, but is the reason they don't have it because they do have a disability. There's a lot of layers that have to be uncovered there. Anytime, if you were reassigning for a different reason because a person had a felony and work with kids, easy peasy, go ahead, no questions asked, no liability. But when there's potential for disability on either side, there's no black and white. So possibly.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's exactly right. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation. Another question: if an employee asks another employee if they're vaccinated and they refuse to answer due to HIPAA, how does HR handle any complaints in that regard? My initial reaction is employees shouldn't be chatting with other employees about their vaccination status. Okay. I know that that's going to happen, but again, like, we're trying to prevent disruptions, conflicts, unnecessary confrontations in the workplace. And talking about vaccination status is really turning into talking about religion, talking about politics, some of the things that when we were growing up, we were told you should probably avoid at all costs. So my thought would be, if there is a mandatory program or an incentive program or a need for HR to monitor vaccination status, that goes through HR, and otherwise employees should not be demanding, requesting, asking to know about it. And if an employee comes to you and says, I'm not comfortable working in person because I don't have assurances that everybody here is vaccinated, unfortunately, there's no requirement that you provide assurances that everybody is vaccinated. There is no requirement right now that a percentage of your workforce be vaccinated to come back. Okay. As of May 24th, you can have everybody back if you want, even if 90% of your workforce is not vaccinated. So if your take is we're having people here, you can't work from home, everything else we're doing is safe, we have all these mitigation measures in place, then you're going to have a difficult decision with some employees to just say, like, look, this is our policy, everything is safe, we have no reason to believe that anybody's not following our mitigation measures and our safety policies. And so, we're gonna proceed accordingly. You aren't entitled to know the vaccination status of your coworkers, period. Now, of course, the guy that's saying I'm not telling you because it's HIPAA protected is probably, it's what I say. We talked about it before this presentation, how everybody has my First Amendment right to free speech in the workplace. How often have we heard that, right? Like, well, I have a First Amendment right, I can say whatever I want. Not true, right? Like, that law is narrowly tailored and it pertains to particular actions. It's not like a broad catch-all, but we've seen that with HIPAA, and now we're seeing that with the First Amendment, with the Fourth Amendment. So again, I would discourage employees from discussing their vaccination status with each other. I would tell employees that there's no obligation for employees to disclose that to each other, and that, listen, if this is our policy, whether or not somebody is vaccinated is honestly irrelevant at this stage.
Okay, we have a question again. I thought we were clear, but just in case. Confirm that we can ask for proof of vaccination. Yes, you can ask for proof of vaccination. Yes, you can copy the vaccination card. Put it in your medical file, not your regular personnel record. I think
We got that? All right. I don't think, now here's one last one. We'll finish with this one. How do you handle when an employee feels singled out because they choose not to get vaccinated? Again, I mean, if the employee is not getting vaccinated because of a disability and they're being treated differently in the workplace because of that, you might have an ADA issue on your hands, okay? If the employee is saying I'm being targeted and little do they know I have, this autoimmune disease, I have a chronic condition, I'm pregnant and I can't get vaccinated because I'm pregnant and I haven't disclosed that yet, and now all these people are treating me differently, you might want to take a look at that and say, okay, and maybe have a little discussion about nobody here should be made to feel uncomfortable or unsafe in the workplace. We need to treat everybody consistently. And then maybe a little reminder to employees about, you might find that not everybody can get vaccinated because there are certain reasons why. And we have these anti-discrimination obligations and anti-harassment obligations. So I would want to just sort of probe that a little bit, bring the employee in, talk to the employee, figure out like what's going on, what's being said, is there anything else? Do you have any concerns here regarding violations of our policies, and just sort of flush that employee out. It's going to be very fact specific as always, as Laura mentioned before. And if there's no discrimination concerns and it's just sort of workplace bullying, I would probably want to do a little reminder that, we expect everybody to be treated respectfully and professionally in the workplace, and nobody should be made to feel uncomfortable. But if there might be a discrimination undercurrent, then you probably need to do a more thorough investigation and documentation. Make sure that you don't have, in 6 months from now, when that employee is unfortunately terminated, a discrimination charge on your hands. All right, I think that is all of our questions. So as always, we hope that we address all your questions today. But if you need anything from any of us, our contact information is included. You can email any one of us at any time. We are monitoring what's happening very closely. I am checking Twitter like a lunatic for my OSHA updates. Okay, I know Stacy is as well. So we are going to get out there, and as soon as we hear, we are going to work on rapid reports and blog posts. And to the extent that we need to do a follow-up webinar, or that's something any of you would be interested in, we can do webinars on very short notice, and we can tailor them to particular topics. So please let us know if there's something that you would like us to cover in the future, if there's another way that we can provide legal updates to you that helps you in terms of your business and your employment needs. We're here for you. We truly are. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. It's good to talk. It's good to see some of you and to have some interaction. And we hope to see you in person in the fall and moving forward in 2020. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your questions.